Our reading today is excerpted from a larger piece entitled For a Revolutionary Struggle Against Fascism by Mark Evans, published electronically in the Encyclopedia of Anti-Revisionism Online. The original piece is quite lengthy, so we will hear a selection of passages from the full article. Mark Evans writes, "Everyone who is aware of political developments in this country can see the signs of a rising fascist movement. We are not speaking of isolated acts of reactionary terror or of government repression. Today, we are speaking of a coordinated, determined effort by the most powerful and reactionary sectors of the bourgeoisie to prepare all the conditions for the establishment of a fascist rule should it become necessary. Since the mid-1970s, we have seen a rapid expansion in the activity of openly fascist political organizations like the Ku Klux Klan and the Nazis. Their representatives appear regularly on bourgeois network television, and they are publicized in interviews and promotional articles in national magazines and newspapers, such as the New York Times, Esquire, and Junior Scholastic. In the last decade, there has been a colossal growth in police brutality and murder of the residents of the United States. This carnage has been justified by the bourgeoisie as necessary to fight crime. Moreover, the increasing presence of the Klan in the trade union bureaucracy, the organization of police unions, Teamsters, and fraternal orders of police, and the acceptance of these into the trade union councils, even into the leadership of these councils, reveals the trend toward fascistization to the trade union bureaucracy. We must fight to deny fascism a social base among the middle class and the backward workers who are rejecting the traditional political parties, the Democrats and Republicans, and are seeking radical solutions to the problems they face. Typically, it is this mass of the discontented middle class and backward workers that the fascist movement seeks to deceive and bring into its camp. It hides the fact that it is the bourgeoisie that is crushing the people and attacking their standard of living. Instead, they're scapegoating the oppressed nationalities, the immigrant workers, foreigners, unemployed workers, labor unions, and so on. The fascists particularly play on the desire of the petty bourgeois to return to the days of prosperity for small enterprises. We must address the problems faced by the middle classes, the problems of monopolization of production and trade, profiteering by bank capital, skyrocketing inflation and taxes that are being used to drive small farmers and businessmen out of business and consume the savings of the middle class and the labor aristocracy. While making no concessions to the desires of these strata to go back, we must clearly expose that it is the monopoly bourgeoisie that is attacking them, not the working class and oppressed nationalities in this country and abroad. The fascist movement in the United States is bound up with the system of national oppression, and US fascist ideology is meshed with its natural companion, national chauvinism and racism. The strength of racism and national chauvinism among many whites is one of the great strengths of the fascist movement in the United States. We must dedicate tremendous efforts to combating white racism through strong ideological and political struggle. We must concentrate our attention, especially on cultivating anti-racist sentiments and actions among white workers. And the surprise, this article was originally published in the Workers' Journal in January 1981.
There is so much to talk about this morning. Tomorrow is the pagan holiday of Beltane, created for centuries and celebrated by the Celts in the area of the world known as Ireland and Scotland these days. It is a holiday celebrating the beginning of summer and the coming fertility of land and crops and livestock and community. When the community, bleh, good morning. Yeah, I clearly haven't had enough coffee. When the culture was predominantly agricultural in nature, rituals would include blessing the animals and seed stock by passing them between twin fires, meant to cleanse them, burning away whatever dust or hull needed to be shed for new growth to spring forth in the new growing season. Young couples would court in the open, gathering flowers by day and building fires in the evening around which to gather and build relationships. It is also worth mentioning that this is approximately the time of year when pregnancies conceived in the darkest winter weeks around the solstice would begin to become undeniably evident. Thus, we celebrate fertility. Marriages were common around the time of Beltane, as were betrothals and other celebrations of fertility and the anticipation of new birth. Beltane, according to the mythology, is the time when the young god, birthed by the goddess at the winter solstice, would become mature enough to court and bed a goddess to renew the cycle of life and birth for the year. Many ancient cultures celebrated rituals of sexual fertility in the spring months after the winter solstice. Lupercalia is perhaps the most notorious springtime celebration, happening in mid-February around Valentine's Day. In order to impress potential mates, young men would chase women and hit them with strips of hide from freshly butchered goats. Who says foreplay is dead? Lovers would be paired off by lottery and spend the length of the week-long festival in sexual revelry, after which they were free to part ways, or if they decided that they actually liked each other, they had the option to stay together for the year until the next year's festival. Ancient Rome was a really weird place. But whatever the sources of mythology, Beltane is a celebration of fertility and hope, promising growth and abundance in the coming year, and it happens on May 1st. The world lost someone truly great this week with Harry Belafonte. The song we sang earlier with the Muppet video was more than just a feel-good send-off to a national treasure. On this eve of Beltane, Belafonte's Turn the World Around song seems absolutely perfect. We come from the fire, sang Belafonte. We come from the ocean and the mountain. We come from the earth. And we are connected to it all, to all of nature, all of creation. As the earth moves through the annual seasons, so do we, the humans that populate the earth. We come from the fire. Let's go back to the fire. We come from the water. Let's go back to the water. We come from the mountain. Let's go back to the mountain. Let's turn the world around. Do you know who I am? Do I know who you are? Let us see one another clearly and turn the world around. What seems like, to many, a cheerful, child-friendly song, appropriate for animation with Jim Henson, has deep roots in the natural theology of African and Caribbean culture. Before colonization brought Christianity and disease, or maybe before Christianity brought colonization and disease, to those indigenous peoples, they understood their connection to holiness through the land and the water and the fire that surrounded them in nature, and through their connection to each other in community. So is life, sang Belafonte. It's all connected. You, me, the mountain, the fire, the water, all of it. Turn the world around. It is a call to revolution of sorts, one of the heart and mind and body, an urging to connect to the natural world that connects us all at some level, above and beyond where we can see on the surface of our lives. Excuse me. That song is a celebration of connection and affirmation of interdependence and community. It is every bit as powerful as that ancient Celtic ritual pictured on the front of this week's order of service. Not only are we on the eve of Beltane, but we are also on the eve of May Day, the workers' celebration of solidarity and empowerment. Now, according to a quick peek at the Google, Wikipedia has to offer about May Day observance, which happened as a result of the Haymarket Affair, also called the Haymarket Riot or Haymarket Massacre, which is a violent confrontation between police and labor protesters in Chicago on May 4th, 1886. And that riot and massacre became a symbol of the international struggle for workers' rights. It's been associated with May Day, or May 1st, since that day's designation as International Workers' Day in 1889. In 1886, one person was killed and several were injured as police intervened to protect strikebreakers and intimidate strikers during a union action at the McCormick Harvesting Machine Company. And that was part of a national campaign to secure the radical notion of an 8-hour workday. To protest police brutality, anarchist labor leaders called a mass meeting the next day in Haymarket Square. That gathering was pronounced peaceful by Chicago Mayor Carter Harrison, who attended as an observer. After Harrison and most of the demonstrators departed, a contingent of police arrived and demanded that the crowd disperse. At that point, a bomb was thrown by an individual never positively identified, and police responded with random gunfire. 7 officers were killed and 60 others wounded before the violence ended. Civilian casualties have been estimated at 4 to 8 dead and 30 to 40 injured. Our reading today speaks to the perpetual need for a balance of power among economic classes so that none might oppress the other. As I read Mark Evans's piece, I was at first dismayed that much of the language seemed dated, for indeed, it has been more than 4 decades since it was first published. When I stepped back, though, and did a little editing, I replaced phrases like petty bourgeoisie to middle class. It suddenly read as a painfully current and relevant piece. Evans describes so clearly the plight of the disappearing American middle class. He writes, "The fascist movement hides the fact that it is the bourgeoisie that is crushing the people and attacking their standard of living, instead scapegoating the oppressed nationalities, immigrant workers, foreigners, unemployed workers, labor unions, and so on. The fascists particularly play on the desire of the petty bourgeoisie to return to the days of prosperity for small enterprises." This is a common tactic, the romanticization of a time that never was. And this is precisely what is happening in the fascist movement of this century. The middle class has shrunk to the point of invisibility, with millions of Americans owing more in mortgages and student loans than they hold in property of actual value. To be fair, I owe more in educational loans than I owe twice in educational loans what I owe on my mortgage. John Steinbeck said years ago, socialism never took root in America because the poor see themselves not as an exploited proletariat, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Americans are deluded into thinking that they're under attack by immigrants and minorities instead of realizing that it is the wealthy elite, the Koch brothers and Elon Musk and all the others, that are hoarding wealth at obscene levels, who are actually starving the economy from the inside out. It is indeed time for a revolution. I fear that if there is not a revolution of one sort or another, and soon, there will be a revolution of a very different sort, and we as a nation will never recover from it. But what might our revolution be made of? We, meaning Unitarian Universalists, are unlikely to take up arms in our effort to turn the world around. We are more likely to sing. Not always well, but sing with enthusiasm. So what is it that will overcome the fear and hatred that the fascists wield with such efficiency? Dr. King told us that love was the only thing that could overcome hate, and he was right. How are we to organize a revolution then based on love? Are we to stand in the public square with signs that read "free hugs"? For what it's worth, I've done that a couple of times. On a generically boring Tuesday in Harvard Square, and another time during Boston's Gay Pride Festival. And I have to tell you, it can be a powerful experience. Surprisingly so, for those giving and receiving. But free hugs are good, but they are unlikely to be the only effective strategy or tactic we employ. To create a revolution based on love, we must understand love in terms beyond the Hallmark card fantasy of endless bliss and harmony. Love takes work and patience and communication. Love takes a willingness to listen and learn and be wrong and compromise. And the work before us is not small. It is an enormous task to educate people who are committed to a lie. And if I am to be perfectly honest, I must admit that I am not an expert in this work. In fact, I get frustrated pretty quickly. But still, I must try. Because doing nothing is not an option. Fascism will not die of its own volition. It will not simply wither and fade away if we ignore it. It must be opposed, protested, corrected, and held accountable. And we must offer a solution to those who seek refuge in that special brand of hate. People hate because they are afraid. They hate because they feel unheard, obsolete, unimportant, embarrassed, humiliated, emasculated. People who feel loved do not lash out. People who feel valued do not seek to harm others. People who feel secure do not need to diminish others to affirm their own validity. Evans explained it clearly. He wrote, "We must address the problems faced by the middle classes, the problems of monopolization of production and trade, profiteering by bank capital, skyrocketing inflation and taxes that are being used to drive small farmers and businessmen out of business and consume the savings of the middle class and the labor aristocracy, while making no concessions to the desires of these strata to go back. We must clearly expose that this is the monopoly bourgeoisie that is attacking them, not the working class and oppressed nationalities in this country and abroad." He goes on to talk about the emotional reasons for fascism's appeal, that of personal insecurity of the patriarchy, with ever-growing realization of our own cultural and natural imperfection, with every revelation of our historic and systemic flaws, people get defensive. Can we say 1619 Project? won a Pulitzer, gained the author death threats. Nobody, after all, wants to be exposed as wrong, particularly when they are so proud of who they are. Rodgers and Hammerstein taught us in the classical musical film South Pacific that hatred of others, what? Must be carefully taught. Exactly. Thus, so it must be carefully untaught. Exposing people to new, accurate information is not effective if they are emotionally wedded to a myth that affirms their worldview. A revolution of connection and love is what will work. We need a way to connect with others and with the world around us. We need to get back to basics. We are from the mountain. Let's go back to the mountain. We are from the water. Let's go back to the water. Let's turn the world around. Let's see each other clearly. Do you know who I am? Do I know who you are? Tell me about yourself. What do you love? What brings you joy? What makes your heart sing? Tell me about your children. Tell me about your pride in them. These are the things that connect us. So is life. Interconnectedness is not a thing we can deny. Water makes the river, Belafonte said, and river washes the mountain, and fire makes the sunlight, and we need them all. So let us act together then, individually, yes, and together, to turn the world around in a revolution of love and hope. And this is a revolution of the heart and the body and the mind, and it must succeed if we are to overcome the powers that seek to keep us divided. May this work be our practice and our legacy. Amen.